Greetings, welcome to Mandibil, and I'll just jump right back into the monistic idealism video with Bernardo Kastrup. And this segment will be about the meta problem of consciousness. So let's hear it.
Yeah, so we're going to be jumping into philosophy of mind now.
This is a tricky one. There is a real meta problem in the sense that curiously, there is a minority of people who do understand what physicalism is and entails and what idealism is and entails. They do understand all that, and yet they do not recognize the hard problem. The hard problem is the following. There is nothing about physical parameters or properties in terms of which we could deduce the qualities of experience in principle. In practice,
I think, personally, this is a strawman presentation of the hard problem in order to get rid of. It's almost like I'm just guessing here, right? I'm sort of second guessing the incentives, but a number or a quantification is not an experience. That is something you interpret or derive from some kind of comparison of what you experience. It's sort of second order from the actual experience. So by saying there's nothing about the numbers and the parameters and the constants or whatever that is sort of interpreted from physics that gives you the smell of roses, for instance, right? No, but that's not the point. The point is that when you think of it arrives from the idea of you have direct access to an external world. That's why you think, if you are suffering, so to say, from the hard problem, that's why you think there is a problem you can solve. Because if you think you have an outside world you have direct access to, and then that your body, your skull, your brain, and your mind inside that brain is a part of that story, of that external world, right? So somehow when that external world, if you think you have direct access to it, and it's described by all these various laws that he refers to, then that should be able to explain that mind that is responsible for those particular qualia, as they're called usually, like smell of roses or the color red and so on, right? But it's because materialists think of an external world as a direct access, the what I usually call the physicalist paradox or materialist paradox, right? That they think they should be able to explain mind at some core center point, as sort of the center of this the reality solar system, right? Where that reality you're referring to, you are always in the center, in the middle of that. It's always around you, so to say, right? In the physical, maybe I'm rambling a bit here, right? I stepped right into it, right? But it's because of the inside-outside dichotomy problem that ends up being a paradox in physicalism. That physicalists think that they have to explain mind from that external world that Bernardo Kastrup correctly points out is just taking the territory out of the map. or the map out of the territory, and then thinking you can extract the territory from that map. You just extract it to an imagined external world. That's correct. He goes about violating that same principle later in his philosophy, but that's another story. So if you think you have direct access to some external world, of course there should be it's not of course, but if you're not too stupid, you will end up thinking, my God, how does that become my experiences, right? And it's like, if you're a materialist, you actually think of the world as a kind of solipsism. I would say it's close enough, right? Where you are actually having a direct access to the whole universe. You might not be aware of it all the time, right? Obviously, I wouldn't think that. But it's kind of limited solipsism in a way, right? Where I'm having a direct access to this little particular aspect of a complete universe. Whenever I'm aware of that particular aspect of the universe. But they don't realize, well, I had to be aware of it. I have to be there, right? I had to be down at the grocery store in order to experience that apple I say is outside myself, right? And they don't correlate or don't think of the problem in saying, well, why do I always have to be there in order to be aware of that external world I already know is there, right? That's the paradox. They pointed to the paradox. That they don't realize they always have to be there to experience whatever they claim is out there, right? Why can't they just claim it's out there without experiencing it? And if they have to come around always to experience and then say, it's outside myself, then they are sort of saying, whenever I'm experiencing something, it must be outside myself. That's the problem. How would you get to that? Right? How would you possibly, how could you take something out of your own experience and say, now that which I'm experiencing is outside my experience? That's the paradox, right? But because they do that, they all of a sudden downgrade the importance of their own experience and saying, I am experiencing an objective external world. How does that become my experience? And of course, correctly, Bernardo Kastrup says that's stupid, right? And I would agree with that. But it's not because they come up with how to quantify that experience they say is outside themselves, right? Just because they have meters and ångström and hertz and whatever units and measuring shit, right? Doesn't mean that is what they expect to be a color. That's a straw man, I think, in order to make it even more ridiculously sounding. I'm just still, it's like, no. The problem is the paradoxical treatment of this kind of metaphysics, usually known as physicalism, I think, right? It's the inside-outside paradox in physicalism that is the problem. That's the deeper problem. The hard problem is merely a symptom of bad metaphysics, I would say, right? But because they don't, as he also points out, they don't realize the paradox. What is left is the hard problem. And then they pound on that hard problem with all sorts of neuroscience and all sorts of linguistic epic cycles of terminology, and they become illusionists and all this shit that gets more and more weird, right? Not realizing there's a foundational problem in the metaphysical approach to it. And what I'm trying to say is that's what Bernardo Kastrup should point out. I guess he does that. But it's a kind of straw man to say that physicalists expect. Maybe I'm wrong. I can rule that out. But that's why illusionists, I think, talk about qualia and what it's like. You have the what it's like, but the qualia is a part of that external world they're describing, right? So they take the quality outside and say, you have a what it's likeness of it. That's not really that important. It's the real color, the real elephant, and whatever, right? Now, I'll admit, I have struggled with trying to figure out what the hell illusionist actually trying to convey. I'm as confused as anybody, I suppose, right? Except for the actual, well, maybe the illusionists are even more confused than I am, right? Other people trying to understand illusionism, but I would just try to point out that it's it sounds to me a bit like straw man the way he phrases it here, right?
Can deduce those qualities just by looking at the correlations between brain activity and experience. We don't understand how one leads to the other and if it does that at all. But if we see enough correlations, we start being able to deduce the link between the two in practice, but not in principle. There is nothing about mass, charge, spin, momentum, geometrical relationships, frequencies, and amplitudes, in terms of which we could logically deduce that those...
No, but it's a, maybe it's not as strong a straw man as I first alluded to, but there is some straw man about it, because if you're an empiricist, as I suppose that any decent physicalist would be, right? You are not saying, they wouldn't be saying, I'm experiencing numbers, right? They would say, I'm experiencing something that I then quantify using particular standards for coming up with these numbers, right? Where I'm comparing the elephant with a meter stick, for instance, right? Object meter stick compared to elephant object, right? And there's so many meter sticks that compare to the elephant and so on. That creates a number, but that's the number, or the quantification is not empiricism. It's a calculation based on empiricism, right? And these numbers and standards and particular descriptive aspects of physicalism or physics, maybe you should say, right? Scientific method and so on. They're not, I would say, unless I mean, maybe there are some physicalists who would state this, but I think it's kind of a straw man, this. It's sort of a straw man argument. But that doesn't really matter, because he doesn't get to the foundational problem here, or point out the foundational metaphysical problem or paradox built into physicalism. It's not the numbers we are interested in, it's this inside-outside dichotomy problem. That's the foundational problem that then has the side effect that, because they suffer from this problem, they think that you should able to pinpoint an answer to this so-called problem, called the heart problem, right? So it's the foundational, it's merely a symptom than a problem, right? If you think that you can jump to the moon, for instance, right? And then you try to come up with what clothes should I wear and what shoes should I wear, and like the shoes maybe, right? Or athlete shoes. And then there's this athlete shoe problem that you are trying to solve because you think you can jump to the moon, right? So you should come up with an answer to the shoe problem, or the jumping to the moon shoe problem, right? But the problem is not the shoe. The problem is the jumping to the moon part, right? Just like the problem is not the heart problem. The problem is the metaphysics is fucked up, right? It's paradoxical. That's the problem.
Amplitudes and frequencies correspond to the color blue, or to the feeling of heartbreak. The bridge is logically arbitrary, and there is a reason for that I can elaborate on later if you guys ask. But that's the hard problem. Now, curiously, some people do not see it. Some people who do understand the thing.
No, but the correlation isn't stupid, right? I mean, if the problem is not that you can't correlate. You can correlate all you want. The problem is the inside-outside problem. that I don't think Bernardo Kastrup actually fully understands the significance of, because he seemed to violate it himself, right? By just taking some external world for granted, just like the physicalists do. You have to fucking argue for it somehow, right? You can't just say there is an external world because I can't refute it. No, but just because you can't refute something doesn't mean it's there. I can't refute there's an elephant outside that wall here, right? But it doesn't mean there is an elephant just because I can't refute it, right? I mean, it's weird that he seemed to be unable to actually he can see the hard problem because he's talking about this straw man of various quantification methods, right? But he doesn't seem to realize that external world is imaginary. It can only be imaginary in the sense that if you can't get to something, you can only imagine that it's there. And because it's in imagination, it's a part of your experiences then, right? Then it's not. If you imagine as in my map or my ontology map or diagram above me here, right, shows that external world is also an abstraction within your ontology, so to say, within that which is described by my ontology. So just because you imagine an external world doesn't mean you all of a sudden have an external world. Because an external world is not a part of your ontology, right? Ontology is your starting point, that's your toolbox. So you can imagine all you want, but that doesn't mean that that imagination is all of a sudden that which you imagine. If I imagine an elephant, doesn't mean that all of a sudden pops an elephant out of my imagination, right? That's the same problem he doesn't seem to realize.
Involved do not see the hard problem, and that's curious. It's like a blind spot in one's mind that is very curious. Now, I think most
but I think that it's so ingrained in my mind, or was until I realized the problem, right? It's the default setting of your. I'm reminded of is it Toy Story 3 or what, where Buzz Lightyear all of a sudden changed setting and he starts to speak Spanish, right? But his default setting is Spanish for some reason, right? And if you sort of reset to default setting, you go back to speaking Spanish, right? But he has changed his idea to speak English, to stay with the metaphor, right? But if you sort of reset yourself, if you were to reset yourself and forget everything you have philosophized, I will bet you will start out being a materialist or physicalist, because that's the default understanding of your experience, right? Just ignoring that particular contradiction in your understanding, right? And you can get away with it because there's nothing about the experience that contradicts the understanding. Because you don't have access to that external world. Just pretending that what you experience is an external world will never be refuted by it. Because there's no access to that external world. So you pretending your experience to be an external world will never be refuted by your own experience. And that's why you have to come up with an explanation for why you all of a sudden think you have an external world. Why don't Bernardo Kastrup understand this? That's difficult for me to understand, that he can't see the problem. He's so close to supposedly understanding.
Most of the people that do not see the hard problem do not see it because they actually don't understand what physicalism implies and entails. They just do not understand what the hard problem is. So they don't see it because they don't understand it. That's not a meta problem. That's just short-sightedness. That's just ignorance. It's not a meta problem. There is a meta problem, but I think it's much less widespread.
Yeah, but if the default setting is that you understand your experience as an external world, and you act as if, right? And that external world is never available to you to contradict your experiences, so to say, right? Then you can go around all the time doing this, and that's why you are not. If you have trained yourself as a default setting and gotten used to understanding this way, and it's never contradicted by that actual external world, if there is an external world, right? Then there's nothing to tell you other than some part of your experience called Bernardo Kastrup or Mandibil, who says no, it's paradoxical to think that way, right? If you're working from an inside-outside dichotomy, then unless you're a solipsist about it, right? There's a problem. You can't both be inside and outside your own experience at the same time, right? So I think that there are problems with, there are problems with the paradox. It ends up creating problems among human beings, and that's possibly a very deep and significant problem that ends up in some kind of totalitarianism. Because people think, well, I experienced this, don't contradict my experience, you're weird, right? If you're not in agreement that there is, if they were working from the idea of an external world, and other people are working from the idea of an external world, if they think they have access to that external world, and they disagree with somebody else who think that they have access to an external world, how do they go about changing that or getting to an agreement of some kind, right? They can't. Because if I experience an elephant and you say there isn't an elephant, you're weird. And you better go to the gulags, right? I'm sort of a slightly hyperbolic, but that's where it goes. That's where it goes. And then some crazy idiot like Adolf or Joseph will take over, right?
Than people think. Let me give you an example. A lot of educated people out there who are not philosophers and haven't spent time thinking about this, they make the following assumptions, or they have the following unexamined understanding of physicalism. They think that according to physicalism, our thoughts and our emotions are...
I'm jumping in here, right? I try to think back to before the point I realized this inherent paradox, right? And first of all, I try to understand how the hell was I thinking back then, right? How did I make sense of this? And I think I agree with Bernardo Kastrup that I didn't realize the problem. It was because I didn't realize the problem. I was living in this kind of internal-external limbo state. And the rest of all of my philosophy suffered from it, right? I thought I have some insights I couldn't possibly have when I realized the paradox built into the, foundations. So the rest of because this foundational shit was paradoxical, there would be all sorts of shit in the further down the line of my philosophy back then that would also be flawed because of this foundational problem. And all sorts of, if you look at academic philosophers, right, quote, if 80-90% of them are physicalists, no wonder that all this philosophy is fucked up, because they are working from potentially different foundational understandings that influence the rest of their philosophy. No wonder that philosophy in history basically is seemingly one big pile of contradictions, right? Yeah, on the one hand you can do this, but on the other hand you can see it this way. You hear that all the time when you hear sort of academic philosophers. Oh, you can see it this way, but on the other hand you could also see it this way, and they can sit and talk like that for 3 hours, right? Getting nowhere. Basically just confusing people. Basically implicitly gaslighting them into thinking, well, this is so complicated that if academics can't figure it out, why should I be able? Let me go back to my, brick and mortar job, right? So it ends up being some kind of hugely overcomplicated problem that nobody seems to be able to get a grasp on. It's because of the foundational problems, right? And that's why the heart problem is important, but it may be a red herring. You're getting close to solving the problem, and then you're taking a left turn into trying to solve the hard problem, and you're getting nowhere fast, right? So you have to dig down to the core problem. You have to, don't put on plasters, right? Bandages, fix the wound, so to say, right?
Are in here, inside our heads. But the colors we see, the flavors we taste, the melodies we hear, they are really out there, according to materialism. Perceptual experience in its qualities is really out there, according to materialism, they think. And it's only thoughts and emotions and endogenous experiences that are in here. Well, no, it's not materialism. Materialism would also say the colors you see are not up there. They are in here. They are qualities, experiential qualities, and thus they are generated by your brain inside your skull.
I am not completely convinced that materialists actually think that way, or physicalists. I think they are basically confused about it, right? I think that a run-of-the-mill materialist thinks that colors are both in there and out there at the same time. It's like that too. I'm just having a copy of what is out there in order to know it's out there, right? Not realizing that, well, if you already know what's out there, why would you need an experience of it? And that's why they tend to go in the direction of illusion, because they want to actually get rid of your experience in order to only have that external world. Because if they have, it's sort of a cumbersome and nuisance to have this, you have some whatever, what it's like in there, right? But the actual thing is the external world. But how did they get to that external world? But they needed to be there to experience it, right? So maybe the experience is the starting point. And that imagination of an external world is something you imagine and attach to your actual story, right?
Oh, so are the flavors, so are the melodies, the textures, the smells. There is nothing out there that can be visualized. Out there is just pure abstraction. So you need to understand this in order to understand the hard problem. Because
there's pure abstraction out there? What's that? Pure abstraction? Abstraction, is that not something going on in your so-called mind? There's pure abstraction out there? Abstraction is something that is pulled out of something else. Otherwise, it's not abstracted, right? So what is that abstraction? Where does that abstraction come from? Because you're calling it something, implying it's coming from something else. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an abstraction, right? So it's pure abstraction. Yeah, it's just pure. It's only, there's no dirt in it. It's not lumpy. No. It's perfection. When people use the term pure, right? They're appealing to some kind of perfection. Right? I get kind of worried. Right? It's sort of this woo-woo language we're going into. It's pure abstraction, right? Whoa! They're saying something that you cannot possibly pin down what the hell it is, right?
hard problem is precisely how you go from those pure abstractions into the actual qualities of experience. So if you think that there are real qualities out there, you cannot understand the hard problem. You will be blind to it. But that's just a misunderstanding of materialism. There is no version of materialism.
So he's basically saying those who call themselves materialists, physicalists, whatever, right? They don't even understand their own metaphysics. I mean, it might be the case. And there might be various different kinds of physicalism, maybe, right? Understanding of where the hell are the colors, and where are my what its likenesses, and where are the concepts, and you know, if you listen to some of the illusionists, I mean, I have no fucking clue what they're doing, right? I deconstructed a presentation by Keith Frankish at some point, and I sort of had to throw in the towel at some point, as far as I recall, right? Where I just say, I can't follow this. I don't know what the hell he's doing. I don't understand this, right? This doesn't work. It's the epistemological again problem, right? If you have to create another epicycle and another epicycle and another epicycle in order to explain something that should be fairly decently simple, right? I can get around my house and so on. I don't need all these epicycles in order to get around, right? So it seems like it's more complicated than it needs to be. So it kind of falls for the when complexity compounds as you go on in your philosophy, there might be a problem somewhere, right?
That can be internally consistent, saying that there are fundamental qualities out there and derivative qualities in here. This divide is completely arbitrary. Either qualities are fundamental everywhere, or they are all derivative and they are all inside your head. It's one or the other. But most people who casually would refer to themselves as physicalists do not understand this. And it's surprising. Even people with doctorates in computer science or people close to me, they fall for it.
Well, how about the problem of collective illusions, right? A collective illusion is fundamentally, I think, the idea that there's something out there that binds it together, right? And that something is a part of that external world. But how can people talk about that binding together if they don't have access to that binding? So the collective illusion is what fuels the idea of that external world as a direct access. There must be somebody, even if I don't have access to it, because I'm not experiencing all of the universe right now, right? So it might just be out of my reach at the moment, right? So this collective illusion about the society at large is one of those terms being used, right? Somebody show me what the fuck society is. Show me. Show me. I'm supposed to be obedient to society, but nobody has ever been able to clarify what the hell it is. But it's this collective illusion that sort of gives you a notion that there's some externality that you're a part of with actually being able to pin it down. But it fuels the idea of the access to an external world, right? I think that collective illusions is the biggest problem for human beings. That would be my problem, my statement. It is based on bad metaphysics, right? But it ends up with collective illusions. One of the bad side effects is collective illusions. That's where it goes really bad, right? It always goes to shit when people believe in collective illusions. All through fucking history, right? They're part of the group. They're part of society. Civilization, right? There's a podcast called Fall of Civilizations. It just tells you about all the times this belief in collective illusions end up with a pile of dead people, right? And people build up over generations and generations, right? Just like, the First World War. Europe was basically a happy place for a century, right? There were a few mishappenings here and there, right? The Franco-Prussian War and a few others, right? But basically, in overall terms, compared to the Napoleonic Wars and what came from 1914 and onwards, right? It was basically a happy place, right? But how can it go so fucking wrong in one, the July crisis of 1914? It goes from nobody thinks there's until a few days before a total war. People believe there will be peace, right? And all of a sudden, this collective illusion ends up in people fucking killing each other left and right. I mean, it's the problem of collective illusions, right? And whether or not collective illusions fuels the idea of direct access to an external world, or it's the direct access to an external world that fuels the idea of collectivism or collective illusion. I'm not particularly sure about that, right? But they work together in some fashion that usually ends up being a problem. And That's one of the reasons why I'm so fucking obsessed with Bernardo Kastrup, because he does not address how he gets to that external world, and he will inevitably end up in some kind of a collective illusion, right? That will fuel some stupid shit going on down the road that might not be easily traceable back to this particular misgivings in a foundational metaphysical aspect. But it is. It's a part of how you approach your ontology, right? If you think that metaphysics is a part of your ontology, well, you're going wrong, mate.
For this, it's quite interesting. So there is a meta problem, but it's not widespread. It's quite limited. And it's a psychological problem, not a philosophical problem.
Okay, so you're appealing to that the psychology might very well influence how you think, what you are willing to accept in your thinking, how you approach. If you have a psychology, your psychology becomes some kind of proto-ontology, proto-metaphysics, and you are influenced by what you like and what you don't like. Because you have been pounded since childhood with all sorts of weird shit. All sorts of collective illusions, right? That are manifest in all sorts of shit like religion and scientism and whatever, right? So if you have, I mean, no human being can possibly work alone, right? You will have a shitty life if you're trying to make it everything on your own, right? I can make yeast for my bread, right? I can't. How the hell would I make yeast, right? But I can go down to the grocery store and buy it for what it takes me like 30 seconds or less of my everyday work in order to finance yeast that I cannot possibly make on my own, right? It will take me forever to make some but just reasonably functional yeast of some kind, right? And I probably won't eat whatever the result would be of that yeast, right? So when you think about it, there's basically nothing you can do. What would I fucking do, right? Would I eat grass? Would I roam the street to find the dead animals? Or would I be a scavenger? How the hell would I survive, right? So you're dependent on other individuals. That collective illusion aspect of human beings is what makes what's the word I'm looking for? Working together possible, right? The collective illusions is how you get into agreement with it. It's a monkey way of being in agreement with other people. It's our group who suffer from these collective illusions against the other group over there who suffer from some other collective illusion, right? And we'll kill each other, right? But in order to, we are solidifying our own understanding by pointing out those who are different over there, right? It's sort of a monkey level of philosophy, right? It's probably, it's advanced, stupid monkey level, right? And that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of riffing a bit here, right? But that's one of the glorious aspects of a free market. If you want something that somebody else has, and they want what you have, you don't need to go into all sorts of collective illusions, right? You don't need to. Well, it doesn't matter if they're green or they're yellow or they're brown. It doesn't matter if they're Jewish or Sanskrit or they're Mayans or what. It doesn't matter. You have a carrot, I have an apple. Let's swap, right? It doesn't matter, right? You are interested in the object. You're not interested in the person carrying the object. But if you have to lump people into these collective illusions, then all sorts of shit start to go down, right? And there will be infighting and there will be all sorts of crap going on, right? That's why there were all the problems in human history. It's the collective illusions. That's why the free market is the best bet in there's a few words I'm missing. My vocabulary is not fully functional at the moment. But in the getting not getting together, but getting having problem-free interactions with other people, right? A free market is the best bet. And I guess that because people suffer from all these collective illusions, they consider a free market, or what they call capitalism in the old Marxist way, is like, yeah, it's a system. It's a collective illusion that you have to adhere to, right? No, a free market is just produce some shit and offer it up for trade, right? I mean, you can't feed yourself with a collective illusion, right? You can't eat some communism, right? You can't drive around in communism. Or whatever ism you want to adhere to, right? At the end of the day, it's about some objects and some shit you need, right? I need some yeast. I need some wheel for my bicycle. I need a battery for my laptop. I need I would like to see a movie now and then, or have a bottle of wine, right? Basically, that if you think that, I think that maybe that's why people are so confused about the free market, because they expect to get into some kind of collectivism of some kind. I am being on the free market now, so it should make me happy. No, it's about getting shit done, right? It's taking care of the practical shit. It's not about collective illusions, right? And the collective illusion is the collective illusions is the problem. Is the closest thing to not. It's the what clouds people's ability to get to the foundational problems, of which their heart problem is a symptom. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a deeper problem from which the heart problem is a symptom. And it's a deeper problem you need to get to. But because of various shit like collective illusions, they won't get there. You won't get there because you're not sufficiently willing to trust your own ability to think. You are living in a collective illusion, the collective think. What's it called? It's the sort of the collective thinking. I'm supposed to be thinking this way because other people seem to be thinking this way. It's sort of emperor new clothes kind of scenario, right? So maybe it's enough. I suppose you understand what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, perfect. So, and you know what's interesting? This actually ties right into this next question quite well, in particular with the first part of your answer there. So there's what's called the phenomenal concept strategy, as you know. Sometimes they call it the phenomenal cope strategy. It's in which they hold that there's only an epistemic, but not an ontological gap between physics and subjective experience. So what would be your response to the phenomenal concept strategy?
Okay, so this is a good point to start.
When one is facing
for the noise.
a
Sorry about the noise.
inevitable
If I could stop this. So this is phenomenal concept strategy. I think this is what I covered in another video. So I'll jump over this one in the next video. So I think this is enough for this particular part. So see you in the next one.